So I'm here with Matt Diavella, director, cinematographer, bar mitzvah video visual effects supervisor.
Thank you for adding that in there. I did request it before the interview, and I appreciate you putting it in.
Model minimalist. Yeah. YouTuber extraordinaire, lover of all things Australian.
That's right. Absolutely. At least one thing.
Did you have a real plan for the minimalist stock visually, or did it find its look as you shot with the different kind of guests and personalities and actors?
Yeah, I think both are true. I had a plan, and then when I started shooting, that plan just went completely out the window. So I had these ideas about how I wanted to like create each shot, and I wanted like these really, because we were going from city to city, and the guys were on tour, and I was kind of capturing them as they talked to people about their journey into minimalism. So I had these ideas about opening up each scene, or at least each city stop, with these beautiful, wide, minimalist type landscape type shots. Yeah, and then just kind of doing that all throughout the film. And then it just didn't really, I guess, fit with the nature of a one-person run and gun doc type shoot, and it also just didn't fit with the kind of filmmaker that I was and the way that I captured interviews and captured shots. And while I tried to do some of that stuff, and even today I maybe infuse more of that kind of minimalist filmmaking with the white backdrop and really simple shots, at the time I think it was a little bit too ambitious for me, where I just didn't have enough time to plan out those shots that well. And then once you get into it, like Mike Tyson says, like everybody's a plan until they get punched in the face. So it was really me just trying to adapt on the fly and trying to capture everything that I needed. And it wasn't going to be planning out every single shot. It was going to be capturing 100 shots and then trying to find the best 3 or 4 for each scene.
For those, 7 or 8 minutes of each person, how long were the interviews? Were you shooting each for a couple of hours, each for, just 20 minutes? Did it vary?
I think the ideal time for an interview is at least 60 minutes. A lot of times, though, we're interviewing people in like a run and gun fashion. Some people were not official sit down interviews. It was like pulling people to the side after an event, or even me pulling Josh and Ryan to the side after an event and getting an interview with them. But I found there was like maybe one string where we did 3 or 4 interviews in a bookshop that was like busy. It was right before their event, and you just realize you're like, one turned out amazing. It was this interview with AJ Leon, and it was just super passionate interview. It was just one of those things. And for me, it was realizing that I'm capturing emotion versus creating emotion. Like sometimes as a filmmaker and an editor, you're creating emotion by how you're editing the footage together, the way you bring the music in, the way you build it up with all these shots. And, I certainly did that towards the end of the film. But I think what's much greater and much more difficult of an accomplishment is to actually just show emotion and to capture it. And I think in that interview specifically, even though it was 20 minutes in a bookshop, there was a lot of emotion that came out in that interview that obviously it was worth capturing. So it's like, even if you don't have 60 minutes or 2 hours to sit down with somebody, sometimes it's worth it just to kind of bite the bullet.
Like a lot of filmmakers do go between narrative filmmaking and documentary filmmaking, we feel like we need to make the interview good. There's that great quote, every attempt to extend the truth diminishes the truth. Which is sort of like, once you go past what's really there, people are like, oh, they're manipulating me. Whereas if just locked off shot, even in a kind of a wide, just showing what it is that they're passionate about, like jumps off the screen.
Right, because that I think, when you're using a close-up, you're using it for a specific reason, and you're clearly trying to like convey something or make it more intense than it actually is. And I think that's maybe one thing that a lot of beginning filmmakers and even myself struggle with, is like forcing it, because it's hard to find the right person. And I think at the same time you have like sometimes too much of a plan going in, and I'm a over preparer, and I really prepare as much as I can for every interview that I do, even if I'm not going to be the one asking the questions. Sometimes when it came to minimalism, a majority of the time I was actually just filming and capturing it, and then I would just be observing the interview and making sure we got everything we needed, and then coming in with additional questions. But sometimes we go in with too much of a plan. And as you know, when you get into a conversation with somebody, it could go in 1,000 different directions. And it is your job to guide it in the right way. But at the same time, sometimes we try to force it in the wrong way. I just did an interview with Julian Smith, who wrote the book The Flinch. I don't know if I recommend that book like probably about 1,000 times on my channel, but like just so good. And he did this thing about like cold showers, so I'm doing a 30-day cold shower challenge. So there's certain things that I needed to get out of that interview, like when did the flinch come up? Why should people take cold showers? Like, but at the same time, it's like you gotta let go of that a little bit if it's not going in the way that you want it to go.
Yeah. It's like very often it's prepare, like with narrative, like storyboard everything, shot list everything, plan everything, but then be prepared to throw it all away.
Yeah. Right? Does that happen like more often with the narrative stuff? Because I feel like narrative is very obviously very scripted compared to a doc. But I imagine there are moments where you're like, this doesn't feel the way that I thought it was going to be on the page.
Usually your shot list and your storyboards are your safety net. So like, if I get these shots, this scene will cut and the scene will do what it needs to do in the film. But then if the performance is amazing, or like the location is just way better over there, or like, something else comes out, you have to be confident enough as a filmmaker to like tear it up and be like, we're doing this instead.
Yeah, I don't think I'm good enough to like have everything planned out ahead of time, because so many times I'm like, once I've even shot something and I'm editing with it and I'm playing around and feeling how, did that joke come across right? Is that actually funny? Should I delete that or retry that? I'm like, most of the time I have to go back and like reshoot and re-edit things and just try it 100 different times to be able to get it right. Like I couldn't imagine a situation where you have, $50, $100 million budget and you got to get it right.
Like neither can I. I mean, I can imagine it. I've never done it, but there are systems in place to make sure that happens. Yeah. Were you part of the sales process of like minimalism going on Netflix? Sort of is looking a little bit like a tipping point for that movement. Like it just got access. Like if everyone else like, hey, you should go see this documentary. It's great. People are like, oh yeah, it's on Netflix. Oh, everyone is gonna watch it because it's free. They've already paid for it.
Right.
Did you shoot it hoping that would happen? Did you have a plan for it?
The whole entire plan was to just make a film that we really cared about a movement that was, in hindsight, very small, though being in the middle of it, we felt like it was very big. And, they were blogging and writing essays about minimalism. My co-producers, Josh and Ryan, who were also in the film. So we knew that there was at least millions of people who connected with minimalism. And when you think back to that time, though, too, there was no documentary. There was Marie Kondo had a book, but she didn't have her Netflix series, which just came out recently. And now we're seeing a wave of people telling stories about minimalism and simple living through film and video, which I think is totally different than what it was. But in terms of the film, we had no expectation of this is going to be on Netflix. My perspective, too, was like I obviously knew Netflix was massive, but I also knew that there was a lot of documentaries that just get lost on Netflix. So just because you get your film to it, and I know like many, many documentaries even that I've seen that have gotten to Netflix but haven't gotten a huge reception, haven't blown up. A lot of people haven't seen it. So it wasn't like, I need to get on Netflix or else we're a failure. And so we like released it independently, and then eventually we're able to get it on Netflix, and then it ended up trending on the homepage for a lot of people, because obviously everybody's homepage is a little different. And so that was really cool. And it's still hard to understand the impact or how many people, you never know how many people viewed it. So it actually wasn't Netflix that blew stuff up. So I didn't have a YouTube. I mean, I had a YouTube channel, but I never posted. So we can just say I didn't have a YouTube channel. Like many of us, we created an account 7 years ago and then just never uploaded videos. So in 2016 is when the film came out, and it went on Netflix in December. And then beginning in 2016, when the film had some success, when I was able to actually make some money off of an original project of mine, it was an opportunity for me to say, maybe this is the time to invest and push all into original content. I've got a bit of a runway. Up until that time, I'd been doing all freelance work, bar mitzvah videos, like everything I could get. I mean, I had pushed my way into working with startups and a lot of tech companies, and it was really fulfilling work, but I just was more fulfilled and found it more challenging to say, hey, can I actually grow an audience? Can I create my own original films and have an audience that'd be willing to pay for those videos? Yeah. So that was my challenge starting in 2017, and it took about a year and a couple months before there was that tipping point moment. Yeah.
YouTube is something I really enjoy, because it's not a life coach who's saying, right, I have the answers, here they are.
Yeah.
You're saying, I have this attitude and this philosophy about how I want to live my life and grow as a person. I'm going to go talk to all these people that know more than me in some way, shape, or form, and I'm going to like share with you what I find out.
Yeah, well, I think that the one thing of making the differentiation between I'm not an expert, I'm an experimenter, was huge for me. And it was one of those things that was, it took me a little while of creating to realize it. Because sometimes I would turn on the camera and I would be trying to teach something, and I would feel myself coming across like I know everything. And I'm like, this is not me, though. You know, Tim Ferriss obviously was, I think, the first person that really took that approach of just being a human guinea pig and just kind of learning through trial and error. So I think he's an amazing example. I forget the YouTuber's name, but I recently came across him where he does like learning something new, and he's just like learning how to do a kickflip on a skateboard, and he just will show repetition of doing it 1,000 times until he hits it. And I'm like, I think there's a huge opportunity there because, you know, like you said, a lot of people have made a living off of being the experts and being the Tony Robbins on stage at saying, I have all the answers. And that's great. And I think Tony Robbins is amazing, but I'm not him, and many people aren't. So I think there's an opportunity to be relatable and just be an actual human. It takes a lot of the pressure off me that every time I turn on the camera, I don't need to be the person with all the answers. I think it's actually a good thing. A lot of people can be pressured out of creating because of that. But I think in a way, it's like, if you're being yourself, there's no reason why somebody should be able to shit on you. And if they do, that's on them. You know, I'm just going to be who I am. Yeah. And there's a constant challenge of storytelling every time I'm trying to make a film. And I mean, that's truly what I enjoy most out of it. Like, obviously it's great to help people and hopefully provide. You can't control that though, right? Yeah, you can't control it. So for me, I'm like, how can I make this film, this 8 to 10 minute film that I make every week, as good as it could possibly be under those constraints that I have? And to me, that's an endless challenge. And it's one that I'm continually also trying to say, how can I improve upon it? I think the one problem that a lot of YouTubers have is that they only see themselves as YouTubers. And I'll talk to, you know, people who are filmmakers, and they're like, well, I'm just a YouTuber. I'm not a filmmaker like you. And I'm like, what does the platform matter? I mean, I think, and some people will lower themselves to the platform and be like, I'm doing YouTube, so everything needs to be quick cut, flashy, high pitched voice, like, hey, everybody. And it's like, you don't have to do that. You could create your own style, and you could be a filmmaker on YouTube if you want to. There's obviously like a place for everybody. I mean, there's so many different genres, and you know, if you're really into like podcasts and watch Joe Rogan's podcast, you're gonna have a different experience on YouTube than somebody who's into PewDiePie or somebody who's into Sarah Dietschy or one of these other YouTubers. Depending on what your interests are and what kind of films or topics you're into, you're gonna see a different side of YouTube. And so I don't think there's any reason why you can't kind of create your own path.
You know, where do you see the future of those films? Will it still be you with like kind of exploring a facet of minimalism in your apartment, or are you planning on taking?
No, that's a great question.
To the like, you know, traveling the world and meeting other minimalists or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and that's definitely where my head's at right now. And I'm about to bring on a filmmaker to help me out part time. And the idea would be then to hopefully have a small team. I mean, I come from do-it-yourself, where I used to like shoot, edit, and do I mean, I still do right now. But like when I was working with clients, I eventually built it up to have a team of like maybe 2-3 people when I would go on these shoots. And oftentimes I think that is more than enough for what you need. So ideally, to be able to like have interviews, like if I create a bigger platform, then I could have potentially more interesting and engaging and bigger guests to be able to interview, and then create films around that. So topics that I'm interested in, that I think my audience would be interested in. I think that would be the goal, is to kind of continue to reinvest in the films. And that's always been the goal, is like, how can I continually make this better? Whether it's the storytelling or it's the quality of the production. When people struggle to be like, well, why does my voice matter? Why should I make a YouTube video or make a YouTube channel? And I think that you can bring a unique perspective just from your past experience. And it's not for everybody, but I think that's where you can, like, your own experiences can separate yourself from other people. Well, think about it just in terms of topics in movies or certain kinds of movies. Bird Box. M. Night Shyamalan made that with The Happening. It's same exact concept. People are killing themselves. Why are they doing it? Like, what is the challenge there? How do you not kill yourself? And this is it was obviously a lot more successful than The Happening was, and it's because it's a different perspective, a different take.
Will never tell us.
Yeah, exactly. But I think we can kind of tell. I think just based on, I don't know if we want to just trust the critics, but
the social malaise. Yeah.
it was much bigger, the conversation around Bird Box, I would say. But it's like, even so, even regardless of how successful each of them were, each of them had their own take on that kind of story. So there's always a different way to spin it. There's always your own personal take on it.
When I first heard of minimalist filmmaking, I was like, oh, that's what it is. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But then I was like, oh, no, there are lots of definitions of it. So I like kind of wanted to hear what your take on it was.
Yeah, that's kind of like, I guess, a bit of playing with constraints. And I mean, when you have a client project, there's certain constraints that you have. There's a deadline, there's a budget, the kind of message and story that you'd be able to tell is based upon that client. I don't know if it's that great to necessarily put a constraint on yourself that's going to hinder the quality of the outcome. I think minimalist filmmaking is just intentional filmmaking. It's just being very thoughtful about the gear you use, about how you tell your story. Oftentimes when it comes to gear, we can think that we need this lens in order to really get the shot we need. And I mean, I fell prey to that a lot early on, where I'm like, I need that 50mm prime lens if I want this thing to look great, or I need that 24mm prime lens. And it's just, you constantly tell yourself this thing, and then you spend $3,000, and then you bring it back.
Much better, and you're like, well, my interview's still crappy.
Yeah, exactly. Like if oh my god, like
the script is terrible.
Exactly. Then so you can do a lot with a little bit of gear, but I think that it's a balance. So I don't think it's as easy as saying like the story is the most important thing and forget about the gear, because obviously, like, I mean, look at the set we have right now. This is shot beautifully. The lights are everything you've done is very thoughtful and intentional, and it wouldn't look very good if you just shut all the lights off and then just use natural light from the door. So it's I think that you have to play with both of those, understand that there's a bit of a pressure to always get the new gear, to always one up yourself.
I guess it's gone from, can you afford to make a movie, into, can you find an audience for your film? You know, there are dozens, millions of those credit card movies of people who like rent a Red or a C200, rent like their uncle's basement or whatever, and it's like, some of those must be great. We'll just never see them because those people can't get them into the world. And I feel like what you're doing and I'm trying to do is build a community around the films that we want to make as we're making films. Yeah. So like not spend 10 years making a movie and then be like, what do we do with this? Spend 10 years building an audience, and then having some way to distribute or get that movie to people.
The question I would ask though is why a film? Like, why are we driven to make a feature-length film? Is it because that was the first medium within filmmaking, and it's obviously still, it's a thing that people are like, hey, did you see that thing? But then people have that same reaction for digital media. Oh, do you listen to this podcast, or do you watch this YouTube channel? So for me, it's like, if you're going to be telling the same kinds of stories, what's the difference between creating films for YouTube and creating, maybe it's a 10-minute film or a series of 10-minute films versus one long film feature?
If your goal is to get the message out there or to share something that you have, like, why feel like you have to do 90 minutes of it?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge for a lot of people, because having created a documentary, it's a long format project. It's really tough. It's hard to keep it engaging and interesting and covering new topics and not being repetitive. So I think that there's a great challenge to it. And I think maybe sometimes people can leave watching a film feeling a certain kind of emotion that you maybe can't feel in a short. I remember the first time I was in an audience of people watching my film, and it was terrifying. And it was like, all of a sudden I was like, wow, it's crazy to think all of these hours and hours and hours I spent working by myself, like editing this thing. And then all of a sudden now it's in front of a screen where 100 people are watching it.
This is my last question. What captivates you about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson?
Oh boy.
And what would you what would you ask him if you met him?
The whole goal is always to like interview interesting people that inspire you. But I also wanted to say, hey, who's the biggest guest that I could possibly get? And let me just reach for something that I think's just not going to happen. Yeah. That's just completely impossible. So I was like, The Rock. Because it's also, my podcast is called The Ground Up Show. It's about people who've built something from nothing, people who know what it takes to work hard. And for him, he's somebody who, it appears like he's at the top, right? But he kind of sheds away that myth that you can make it, because he's continually putting in the work. He continually works his ass off. And he, I think, is a good, genuine person. And I think he's somebody who actually would be just fun to talk to. In terms of the question, I think I would ask him, like, why did you decide to come on my podcast? That would be my first question. But then it's like, I don't know, man. I think sometimes we try to get too much out of interviews, and we try to, like some people refer to it as like squeezing as much juice as they can out of an interview, get as much facts and knowledge as they can. And I'm like, I think I would more so try to be in the moment, actually enjoy the conversation. I would prepare like crazy, like we talked about earlier. But at the same time, I would want to just kind of experience that moment and just try to like have a human connection versus trying to get something transactional out of it. Yeah. Really interested to see where this is going to go in the next 5 to 10 years. Like the fact that now people who Gen Z, the biggest celebrities in their mind are YouTubers. Like probably 8 out of 10, I think, of the people that they most relate to that they would consider celebrities aren't A-listers anymore. They're not people within Hollywood. So I think that's only going to continue to grow. And then I think there's going to be a huge shift where a view's a view. So if you're on YouTube, what's the difference between somebody watching your YouTube video and then somebody watching a feature film?
It's a wonderful time to be making movies.
Yeah, it's great.
Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, brother. This is fun.